everyone again. This is the second video we've done, and it wasn't the one we planned. What we planned to do was to do one on a Compass Trailhawk, and then we had planned to do a couple of other ones, and life gets in the way and vehicles get sold and plans change. But this was one I couldn't avoid, and I will tell you in advance that if you think you hear a lot of exhaust noise, that's probably true. So what we are in today is an exceptionally special car. This is a 2008 BMW M3 two-door coupe. And this is by no means a review of the car from a driving perspective. This is more just a vehicle that I wanted to commit to memory and a vehicle that I wanted to do a video on, because this vehicle is very special to me. I've been in the car business for 30 odd years, nearly, and this is my brother's car. So what happened was, he contacted me and said that with his impending retirement, he wanted to have a summer car that he could enjoy, that under no circumstances was I allowed to drive in the rain, and that what he was really looking for was a V8 M3 in a nice condition one. I looked around for about 3-4 months, and this is the piece that I ended up buying, and have spent some time just touching up any little things that were not absolutely pristine. And so here she is. She has 85,000 kilometers, just over 50,000 miles, and it is white exterior, black interior, has the M Sport exhaust package on it. And to be honest with you, sitting where I'm sitting right now, you would not know that it wasn't pretty much brand new. Like, everything on this vehicle feels very, very tight. Everything feels really remarkably good for a vehicle that now is coming on over 13 years old. So the purpose of the video, really, honestly, this is one of the iconic cars. This is the type of car that my brother and I used to talk about when we were kids, and one day owning, and I'm incredibly jealous because he's got one and I don't. And this car was kind of the basis of our love for Top Gear, and actually probably precedes that. Back when we were kids, it was playing Top Trumps, and remembering statistics on cars, and buying What Car magazines back in England, and on long road trips with our parents, my brother and I would sit in the back as young children and look at cars going by and look up their statistics and pretty much memorize them. And it was where a lifelong passion for cars came from. And in many ways, the car that I'm driving right now is a car that's probably not going to exist in the future. It's a small, lightweight V8 in a sports car, and unfortunately these are now going the way of the dinosaurs. They're going to be replaced by the hybrids and the electric cars and everything else that we see. So this is a time capsule, and this is a car that, you know, was as exceptional as anything else on the road at that time in terms of a usable everyday driver. So high points, obviously over 400 horsepower, small, thick steering wheel, nice little flappy paddles, easily accessible behind, the typical Bavarian, very clear, very straightforward BMW dash, very, very analog. Obviously, one thing that dates the interior here to its era is the cluster in the middle. That screen was obviously state-of-the-art in its day, but and actually looks pretty comparable to a 2018 Mercedes. But for 2008, this was the latest thing. It does have Bluetooth, but she doesn't have much else. So it's kind of all the things you want and none of the things you don't need. It's not weighed down by excessive electronics. There's less to go wrong on that front. It doesn't have a lot of the nursing nanny aids. In fact, to be fair, the traction control system is a little primitive. Let's go that route. It's kind of there or not there. And having been told specifically by my lovely brother to not drive his car in the wet, I am pulling a Jeremy Clarkson on a James May, and probably in a little bit here I'll eat a chocolate flake and drop some crumbs in it, and then afterwards do some other things with greasy fingers to annoy him when he watches this video. First impressions driving it: seating position's great, seats are well bolstered, you sit low in the car but not too low. The hood in front of you has a really attractive sort of central bulge, but the actual visibility is very good. Side mirrors are a little smaller than I'm used to, and a little more awkward because there's a bit of a blind spot in the Coupe version here. But I guess BMW designed the vehicle with the expectation that most people wouldn't be overtaken very often. That seems to be the German mentality. You don't need to see as well out of the back as you do out of the front. Transmission's an automatic, as you can tell, because I haven't been shifting gears. And it has like 5 or 6 different settings. I think 6 different settings. No, I was right with 5. 5 different settings. And the settings are essentially how much it holds it in each gear, how firmly it changes the gears, how rapidly it changes the gears. The first 2 or 3 I can't seem to differentiate. But once you get up into 4 and 5, you can definitely notice the difference. I'm driving it today in 4, which is, for whatever reason, my preferred. Then there's a couple of other switches down here for turning off the traction control. I've got a power switch, which kind of just makes everything friskier, makes the throttle response quicker. Obviously, theoretically, activates my ability to access all of the power. And other than that, she's really simple. Like, I had a couple of higher end BMWs myself, including a X5M, and it took about 15 minutes of sitting there and playing with things to get it set up. This one's not like that, and it's actually really nostalgic and really refreshing. Like, I'm sitting in this car, and I've driven this car a sum total of about 6 minutes before the video came on, and I already feel like I'm comfortable. Everything sort of feels pretty natural with it. Yeah, it's a really easy car to drive, and a 400 horsepower car shouldn't be this easy to drive. It should feel awkward and twitchy and, you know, irresponsible and catching every groove in the roads, but this one just doesn't. It's very docile. It doesn't feel that different from, should we say, a 328i in terms of driving around just regularly in town like this. Obviously the engine noise is a bit of a giveaway, the exhaust sounds a bit of a giveaway, but it's eminently drivable. This is something you could jump in and go to work every day and really have very little concern. To me, and my brother and I disagree on this, I still prefer in some ways the model prior, the inline 6, which undeniably was nowhere near as quick as this. I mean, it's almost 100 horsepower less, but it's even more nostalgic for me. It's even lighter. The handling response as a result feels, to my driving style, even more exciting because it feels more stripped down and more athletic. But this is no slouch. This doesn't feel heavy in any way, and again, as with most of these cars, when you get up into this realm, you're splitting hairs. But this M3 is the benchmark, and I mean, if you go back to those Top Gear episodes, 2002 onwards, the new series Top Gear, I remember vividly when they did the road tests in Spain, and Jeremy was driving his driving the C63. May had an Audi, and I think Hammond was the one who had one of these, and they were all teasing him because they said, well, this is a car that marketing directors and guys in white rimmed sunglasses would drive. I believe a Cox car was how they referred to it, but they all agreed that it's just superb. The feeling you get when you're driving it at speed is that you can direct the car exactly where you want to go at all times. There's no overhangs. You feel like your feet end where the headlights are, which isn't true. Obviously, there's a bloody great motor in the way, but that's what it feels like. The way that the hood drops away, I'm relatively, close to this car in front. I'd say maybe 6-7 feet, and I can see the bottom of his tires in front of me. Now, if I was in a Dodge Charger, I'm lucky if I can see his license plate. So what does that do for you? Well, if you've driven like a Golf GTI, this has that sense of chuckability. It has that sense that you could slice through traffic, or that if you were on a track, you would hit the apex every time, because you can see everything that you need to see. And the sense is that the bonnet bulge is accommodating where the core of the engine lies, so it's able to slope away at the sides and give you this excellent visibility. And maybe that's part of what I feel when I look at this, the side mirrors, is that excellent visibility here is not matched by excellence of visibility on the sides. But again, personal preference. As for the transmission, which I was talking about before, I've expressed a couple of times to close friends of mine, I am not as fond of the SMG as I am of some of its competitors. I think the DSG and the Volkswagens, I find a superior transmission, but it's by no means bad. I mean, it's good. It just isn't. I don't find it adapts to my driving style the way that the others do, and I find that sometimes I can catch it out if I go on throttle, off throttle, and back on throttle again. Sometimes I'll catch it where the mapping doesn't know quite what to do, it's not getting the right information, and then it'll hesitate between gears, or sometimes do a double gear jump. So then, for example, if I was in 4th or 3rd, it double shifts down, then you get kangaroo gas jumping forwards, and you have to moderate your throttle in order to get it to smooth out again. Doesn't happen as much again if you're in modes 1 and 2, but the higher up the modes you go, the more likely it is that you're going to have something like that happen. So the solution's relatively simple. You just pop it across into manual mode, and then once you're in manual mode, everything's done through the paddles, and you get to override or decide and basically avoid that mapping issue. But it's happened to me a few times. It doesn't bother me, but it's definitely something that you can tell is there. So is it as good as the DSG? I don't personally think so, but it's definitely no slouch, and it's not a reason not to want one. And really, it's the one thing in the car that I would kind of pick at. But let's get to the other side of that question. If I was buying one and I had a choice between a manual and an automatic, in this particular car, I would buy it with the automatic. If it was the previous model with the 6-cylinder, I'd be tempted to do the manual. And here's the difference why. The inline 6 didn't deliver its power with much torque curve low down, so when you drove it, you felt like you had to row through the gears a lot. And because it was lightweight and in many ways didn't carry as much momentum in the front, you would control your speed quite easily by downshifting through a manual gearbox. It was quite fun to play with. In this one has a lot more torque, a little more weight at the front. I suggest that makes it more suited to an automatic style driving. This thing can create lots of speed without necessarily pulling large RPM, although to be fair, it goes up to 8,000 RPM, which for a V8 is quite exciting. But the chances that you would ever use that without actively meaning to is zero. This thing pulls so well from lower RPM that you can do quite obscene speeds without going too high in the rev counter. So that's kind of like the performance overview. From a personal perspective, as I said, like, this is pretty special. This is the car that my brother has wanted for a long time. He's had some lovely cars. He has some lovely cars, but this one will probably be used largely for trips with him and his fellow golfists, or maybe the odd trip down to Oregon or something like that, some lovely couple of week buzz down the coastal roads, and I can't think of many nicer cars to do it in. So this is something that sort of has a particular resonance for me. And the M3s have been around for such a long time now that we've grown up desiring them, and it really hasn't changed. I've recently been driving some cars that are on the higher end of the price spectrum, and surprised myself with how little I enjoy driving them. There's definitely a point at which cars become less fun to drive as they get more extreme, as they get more expensive, as the design outweighs function. So if I'm sitting in a McLaren, it may be an exceptional piece of engineering, but it's not a relaxing drive. It's not something you want to drive. Even if you own it, you can't park it anywhere. So what's the blend, or what's the balance between performance, handling, and usability? For me, I'm an Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio guy. I had a 2017 this summer, the summer just gone, and it knocked the M3 off its pedestal for me. I am 100% positive my brother would drive the same car and not agree. And that's exactly how it should be. Cars of this type should be polarizing. If a friend of mine sat down with me in a pub and said the C63S or the Black Edition is better than the M3 of the same era, I would have a very good time disagreeing with him or agreeing with him, but his opinion would be just as valid as mine. The differential between these vehicles is slim, but it's definitely there, and they all have personality. The Alfa Romeo's personality more suited my style of driving, what I enjoy. That car does in spades. This car is slightly more languid. It's slightly more refined, I think would be a good word for it. Everything in here is truly Germanically brilliant. Like, there is no vibration, there's no buzzing, there's no creaking. The Alfa did all of those, and it was 9 years newer. The Alfa literally felt like at any given time, if I gave it full throttle, the engine would quit. But man, was it fun doing it. This doesn't feel like that. This feels quite responsible and quite grown up. This is sort of a, this is a merchant banker who does some sort of naughty dancing on the weekend. Like, it can do it, and it can probably do it every bit as well as the Alfa, but it's a bit more schizophrenic. So it's got that sort of 2 personality modes, or maybe even 3 personality modes. The Alfa's just straight insanity right off the bat. And for example, the Alfa exhaust is either silent or embarrassing. Well, when I say embarrassing, quite fun if you're on your own, but if you're sitting next to somebody in traffic, quite embarrassing, because as soon as you go past a certain point, it opens the active exhaust and it's just and really loud, and not even actually a particularly lovely sound. Then people say to me, well, you could put an Akrapovic exhaust on it and then it sounds amazing. Yeah, it does, but now I'm spending 7 grand for acoustics, or 10 grand for acoustics. This, on the other hand, with a relatively straightforward motorsport exhaust on it, sounds great. Like, it sounds lovely, and it's not offensive, and it's not particularly shouty, but it's not quiet by any means. And the loveliest part of this one is on the downshifts. Like when I get up to a speed where I can demonstrate, the downshifts in this vehicle sound fantastic. The rev matching, the little blip, the little bit of overrun, oh, it's a delight. To the point, actually, where one of my employees the other day said that if he could have picked any vehicle that he had been in so far since he started working for me, just from that perspective of sound alone, this would be on his list. And I agree with him. Like, it's definitely part of the experience. And if you're buying a car like this, in my last video I talked about how good cars should have good sound systems, for example. Definitely a car like this, most of us are not good enough drivers in safe enough conditions to get 70% of its ability out. This car can do so much more than my lead hands and lead feet can make it do. So if I even attempted to get it anywhere near its abilities, I'd be arrested or in a lamppost. And that's because of me, not because of it. Now, therefore, it's fair to say that should I get out of this car and climb into an Audi RS5, or should I get out of the Audi RS5 and climb into a Quadrifoglio, they are all going to be similarly quick in my hands, because the limitation's me, not the car. And that's a big part of the experience of driving these, is that you get a flavor of the performance. You're not eating the whole dish. You're just sort of sticking your spoon in and licking it and going, God, that tastes amazing. So when you pull away from the lights, you have a decent pull in first, a little bit of second, and by the time you hit third, you're losing your license if you're staying in the gas. So what are you really saying? Well, that 7 or 8, 6, 7, 8 seconds needs to feel special. Part of what makes it feel special is the way it pulls away, the way it hooks up. I really hope whoever they're going to get is okay. Part of it is how it hooks up and how it accelerates, but part of it's that noise, it's that soundtrack that accompanies it. And if you don't believe me, watch a movie with the sound off. It's not the same experience. This is a complete package, and for that reason, I have no critique of people who tell me the C63 is better than the Audi, because I do genuinely think that the C63's engine sounds nicer than a 2.9 litre turbo. It's not what I would necessarily choose, but it's a valid reason to like it. And again, I'm emphasizing, before people put it in the comments section, I'm emphasizing that because we don't drive it at the limit. Now, if you happen to be a person who's buying these and taking it to the local track on a weekend, completely different conversation. There's a whole bunch of different metrics that I would take into account. But for the everyday guy who's sitting there at home and thinking, I've always wanted an M3, I wonder what it's like to drive it, this is going to accompany everything you do with exactly the experience you want it to give you. The M3 is very, very good at that. It's like they've distilled the essence of what a person wants from a sports sedan or a sports coupe, and yet still not compromise the ability to start it every morning, or still not compromise the ability to go over a speed bump, or still not compromise the ability to put some groceries in the back. And it's that perfect balance of the right performance, the right sound, the right tactile feel, the right steering, the right seating position, the right ergonomics. Nothing in here is particularly strange or fancy, but everything works exceptionally. And again, it feels somewhat like the transition of buying a Golf GTI and then going into a Golf R. It's more Golf. This is more 3 Series, but it still has 3 Series architecture and underpinnings, and it's clear that it does. It just has some pretty exceptional adds. The other thing that I wanted to kind of express about this is these cars are very hard to find in a condition where they've been well respected. The life cycle of these types of vehicles tends to be primary owner, who then, let's assume they're not keeping it for a long protracted period of time, because most do, but the primary owner gets rid of it 4 or 5 years in because they want the next model or they want the next upgrade. The secondary owner is likely to have given it some good love and attention, but by the time these things get to be 9 or 10 years old, they're either treasured, coveted items in a collection, or they have been passed into the hands of people who should not have them. And what I mean by that is these vehicles need good maintenance. The brakes are slotted, drilled rotors. They are soft, intentionally soft compound brake pads. So the pads wear quite quickly. Heavy braking will tend, even with the slotting and drilling, to create some warpage. So it's not uncommon to get into one of these with low brake pads, or the pads have been replaced with cheap replacements, and the cheap replacements are generally not of the same. They're generally not of the same material as the original OEM products. So now what you have is a relatively hard compound, which then causes more heat, and that additional heat and less good braking dynamics, but that additional heat now creates some warpage in the rotors, and the rotors are really expensive. So if somebody's not spending money on these front rotors and front pads on one of these Canadian dollars right now, you would be expected to pay somewhere between $1,700 to $2,000. The engines have relatively fine tolerances. They should be run with the correct oils, etc. If you do not maintain these vehicles, they will bite you back. So it's not uncommon to buy one of these and they have some undesirable engine noises and so on and so forth. So if you are thinking about going out and buying one of these, first of all, put a high premium on buying one which has good maintenance records, or one where you know its history intrinsically. Secondly, do not hesitate to get it inspected by experts. When I bought this vehicle for my brother, I had it inspected by a local BMW specialist, and the thing that made me convinced that this was the one for him was the fact that their senior technician called me up and asked me how much he could buy it for. That's the kind of endorsement that I want when I'm buying something for family. And with that comes this caveat. It is entirely possible that even though I have taken every precaution, and I have 30 years of experience in this business, and I have worked on the service side of this business to the point where I'm probably as experienced as almost anybody you're going to find, the reality is this car could have a major malfunction next month. There is nothing I can do to prevent that. There's nothing I can do to predict that. This vehicle operates entirely perfectly now. But that's the balance. The reason why 911s are treasured as purchases is because you can often put 150,000 kilometers on a Porsche 911 with relatively little fuss or bother. The truth of the matter is, these are by no means bad, but any major repairs are going to be expensive, and you just have to acknowledge that when you buy them. These are not massively expensive to purchase, but they are expensive to keep on the road. So if you're stretching your budget to buy one, you're making a mistake, because the reality is part of the cost is in the future, not just at the time of purchase. Now that sounds like an obvious statement, but you're buying a $35,000 car that can perform very handily alongside $100,000 modern vehicles. This is an absolute performance bargain. Absolute performance bargain. If it was a dry day today and I was in Italy or Germany, I would be driving this thing at speeds that it would be hard to keep up in most regular modern day cars. And it would do it with such ease and such aplomb that I would think I was a better driver than I am. Having said which, would not be difficult to have an engine problem with this vehicle and pick up a $7,000 or $8,000 bill with no ability to predict. It equally might do the next 50,000 kilometers without a hitch. It is one of the reasons why it's so hard for people in my profession to buy and sell cars to family, because we know without a shadow of a doubt that we could do everything right, and yet still have an outcome that is not what we want it to be. So I love this already. I love this car. I'm really confident that I have bought the best one that I could possibly find for my brother within the parameters that he gave me. And I hope she treats me and him well, because he deserves it. This is a car that he has wanted for a very long time, and to be very honest, he has been super patient in treating himself, and nothing would make me happier than if this car meets all of his very exacting expectations. Couple of things I would also caution for. This is kind of advice for the potential buyers out there. Pay good attention to things like tire wear. Pay good attention to not so much what the tire depth is, but how the tires have worn. These vehicles can have a tendency to be driven, should we say, enthusiastically, and then if they hit potholes or they hit or clip curbs, the alignment is one of the first things that goes. Common things you'll see with a vehicle that may have problems, even if the rims have been repaired and the rims are not rashed themselves, if you see shoulder wear on the tires where the sides of the tires are worn more than the center of the tire, that is something to be concerned about. The other thing I would strongly suggest to you is, if you are buying a car like this and the person has chosen to put aftermarket off-brand tires on it, that is a person driving an M3 on a budget. Be very cautious with that vehicle. These vehicles are designed to a specification, and anybody who truly likes them and truly looks after them and is a good owner is likely going to be selective in what kind of tires he puts on. Doesn't have to be a Dunlop, doesn't have to be a Michelin, but at the very least you want to make sure that the tires are properly rated, wired a minimum, and that these tires are, should we say, indicative of a person who cared about their vehicle. Back to the driving experience now. You can see we're sort of out of the traffic. Gives me a chance to experience the vehicle in a slightly different function, although we're still obviously in town at town speeds. Putting it in manual, fifth, coming into the junction here, fourth, you can hear third, second, and the downshifts are so smooth. Like there's not a hint of rev matching issues. Everything about how the transmission engages is predicated on how you're driving it, really. Like what RPM are you downshifting at, how much are you braking at the time when you're downshifting, and so on. So even in automatic mode it will do the same downshifts, because it's essentially adjusting according to how you're driving, how aggressively you're driving, etc. But it's a really lovely sound. The transmission really does allow you to get a sense of manual, but with all of the convenience that the automatic brings. There's no stretch on the transmission. There's no lag between engine RPM, throttle input, and movement. So the clutches themselves engage very strongly and allow the vehicle to feel quite manual. And as I say, if it wasn't for that slight mapping error, it would be everything that the DSG is. I just personally slightly favor one over the other. Wet weather, obviously this wouldn't be my preference for a car like this. It is rear-wheel drive. Rear-wheel drive cars require some attention and some caution, especially when we've got rain like today, and we haven't had rain for 10 days. There's an oiliness to the road that you feel in a car like this that you don't necessarily feel when you're driving a Camry or an Accord. You can feel a slippage, and part of that is just how responsive and how tactile and how communicative the steering is. I can literally sense how the vehicle right now is finding its way through the ruts in the road that I don't feel in other cars. It's a fingertip sensation. It's not taking me across the road, but it's like a light frisson. It's a light vibration under the fingertips that tells me that the car is sensing small variations in the road surface. Now, at the speed I'm driving now, it's not even useful. It's by no means distracting, but it's not even useful. But if I was driving this car in earnest, it's that communication from the steering to the fingertips that allows you to drive cars fast with confidence. And I don't think for 1 second that a car like this is going to be driven hard enough to really find the boundaries of that by myself or my brother. But you get a sense of it. You get a sense of how competent it is. You get a sense of the fact that even when you're going at a rate of knots, there's a lot more to go, and that it's so happy to do it. Like, these cars are clearly built for highway speeds, for Autobahn style driving. And yes, in the wet, high performance flat tires are not probably the greatest thing to want to drive in. Now you tack in rear wheel drive, then you tack on a 414 horsepower engine, and I probably wouldn't want my daughter driving this tonight. She's 18 years old and may not understand the danger under her right foot. But for anybody else, like, if you've got experience and you're used to driving cars, this is so docile and it's so well balanced, and it's so capable of telling you when you're getting within 100% of danger. So driving along here, clearly there's some standing water tonight. It plows through most of it with not a problem, but I'm conscious of the fact that there's aquaplane risk. I'm conscious of the fact that the water could quite easily, in a groove, get under those rear tires. So, you know, respect is necessary. It's a leery beast, this thing. And if I was to say, what would it feel like to drive if you haven't driven one of these, it's probably the base 911 Carrera that I would say has a feel similar to this. Although obviously I'm gonna put myself in jeopardy there because this doesn't have that rear engine feel. But in terms of how tight it is, in terms of how poised it is, I would say that's a reasonably fair analogy. It doesn't feel like the fast Audis do. The fast Audis feel very, very different to this. They feel much more weighted to the front. They feel much more prone to pushing around a corner rather than sort of cutting the corner. But I would also say on a night like tonight, the Audi would be a more confidence-inspiring drive, not just because of the all-wheel drive, but just because a little more weight is over the front steering wheels, whereas in this it has the sort of traditionally classic M3 50/50 weight. That slight weight bias towards the front does give a sense of confidence in the wet. But I'm not really, you know, at a speed where that's a concern for me tonight. Other than that, visibility, you can tell the age of the car a little bit. The headlights are not strong. They're not pitiful, but they're not strong. The new LEDs, the new HIDs are clearly far superior for challenging weather conditions. But that's also what makes them deeply annoying when the weather's clear, because they're very bright for the drivers in front of you. But on a night like tonight, yeah, the road could do with a little more illumination. Other than that, really, honestly, I could be driving a $100,000 sports car right now from 2018 or 2019, and it would be a very similar experience all the way around. Indulgent today, I appreciate that. Probably a little distracting for me, just the emotional attachment that I have to this experience tonight. And I think I'm gonna kind of wind this down by just saying that behind every single person who truly loves cars, there's a long love affair that probably started in childhood with pictures and posters and magazines and car shows, and we all kind of share this kindred spirit where we've all watched Jeremy, James and Richard on their crazy experiences, and we've all felt slightly wistful about the opportunity of one day putting ourselves in the position that they're in. And you know, right this moment I'm experiencing one of those sensations of being in a car that's a true classic and a true icon of its time. And I think back to where I was in my life when this was brand new, and I would have given my left arm and most of my left leg, because this being an automatic, that would have been okay, in order to buy one of these. I would have given anything, and I wouldn't have been disappointed. It's everything that I thought it would be, and in many ways the one thing you couldn't have persuaded me back then is that it would still feel this good this many years later, because the durability is an element of a performance car you just don't expect. Yeah, it's unfortunate that my brother's going to watch this video and then be mad at me because it's raining. I hope he forgives me. Daryl, forgive me.